This story begins with a photograph. This photograph. It is giving China sleepless nights. It shows a boy about 8 years of age, wrapped in robes, greeting the Dalai Lama. And this boy is suddenly an international headliner. The world doesn't know very much about him, neither his name nor his whereabouts. But he is in the news. Is he the next Dalai Lama? There is intense speculation. The picture was taken earlier this month. The date has not been confirmed yet. One report says it was clicked on the 8th of March at a religious ceremony in Dharamshala. Dharamshala is the home of the Tibetan government in exile. A ceremony was held here earlier this month. Some 600 Tibetans were in attendance and the Dalai Lama presided over it. Here is how he introduced the boy, and I'm quoting. We have the reincarnation of Khalka Jetsun Dhampa Rinpoche of Mongolia with us today. What does that mean? He says the new Rinpoche of Mongolia. Rinpoche is the third senior-most Lama or spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. And this boy is the head of the faith in Mongolia. At least that's how the Dalai Lama introduced him. So far, there were only rumors about his existence. No one had seen his face, but this ceremony has changed that. And that is why it holds deep significance. For the first time, the boy has been presented to the world. And why is he so special? He is believed to be the 10th reincarnation of Jetsun Dhampa. Jetsun Dhampa is the original spiritual head of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia. So this 8-year-old boy is being seen as his reincarnation. His identity is still being protected. But we do have some details, like the fact that this boy belongs to an influential family. His grandmother is a former member of parliament in Mongolia. His father is a professor of mathematics at the National University of Mongolia. His mother is the chief executive of Monpolymet. It's a giant business conglomerate in Mongolia. And it has interests in construction and mining. Now, this couple had twins, 2 boys, named Aguidai and Achiltai Altanar. I hope I've got the pronunciation right. Now, one of these 2 boys is the reincarnation of Jetsun Dhampa, the same boy who met the Dalai Lama in that picture. We don't know which one of the twins it is. We can also tell you that this boy holds dual citizenship. He is a citizen of both Mongolia and the US. He was born in America. But why is there so much secrecy around him? The reason is China. His elevation, his introduction to the world, however limited, has clear political implications. It's a challenge to China's authority, even if that authority has no moral or legal basis. China wants to have sole authority on choosing lamas. But that's not happening here. Also, Mongolia shares a border with China. In the past, Beijing has targeted Mongolians over this. It has tried to enforce its will. In 2016, the Dalai Lama made a series of visits to Mongolia. The Chinese threw a fit about it. They cancelled diplomatic meetings. They delayed loans. They shut down the border. Basically, they put so much pressure, both political and economic, that the Mongolians relented. They agreed to not host the Dalai Lama again. And so his last visit to Mongolia was in November 2016, but the Dalai Lama made the most of it. He made a big announcement then. He said Jetsun Dhampa has reincarnated in Mongolia and that a search was on to find him. This was back in 2016. Almost 7 years later, that search seems to be over. The Dalai Lama has officially anointed a successor. There is no official comment from Mongolia yet. Perhaps they do not want to upset China anymore, or they don't want to draw attention to the boy. Whatever be the reason, the silence is well advised, because history shows what China is capable of. Let me tell you what happened in 1995. That's when the Dalai Lama named the new Panchen Lama. What's the Panchen Lama? The second most important figure in the Buddhist faith. His name and identity were declared in 1995. Do you know what China did? They arrested the child and then replaced him with their own candidate. Most Tibetans reject the Chinese choice, but they don't know where the original Panchen Lama is. So this time, they're playing safe, telling followers that a successor has been chosen, but not giving away too much about him. What is China's reaction to all of this? Nothing so far, but it won't be wrong to say that Beijing is tracking this closely. It has been wary of any move by the Dalai Lama. He's the world's most famous political exile. A big thorn in Beijing's side. China wants to control Buddhism, but as long as the Dalai Lama lives, He is the undisputed leader of the faith. So China wants to wait it out and control the succession plan. But the Dalai Lama has other plans. He's identifying the next leaders and shaping the future of his faith. The boy from Mongolia may or may not be his successor, but he'll pave the way for the nomination of a successor, which brings us to the next question. Will the Dalai Lama name a successor? He says he'll decide when he turns 90. Right now, he's 87 years old. When he turns 90, he plans to decide whether he should be reincarnated, and that he would want to be reincarnated in a free country. That's what he said in the past. A free country, which could mean India. Why India? Because it's been the modern capital of Tibetan faith since 1959. That's when the Dalai Lama fled from China. With him came thousands of his followers. New Delhi gave them a home. In the beginning, the Dalai Lama had hoped that the exile would be temporary. But China's actions made it impossible to return. It tightened its grip on Tibet and Tibetans. Now it has every intention of naming the next Dalai Lama, and this has become a tense waiting game. India can play a decisive role here to ensure that Tibetans get to choose their next leader. It won't be easy, but it would be the right thing to do. China had a high-profile visitor this weekend. Apple CEO Tim Cook was visiting, and now he's gone viral. It's a tricky place to be, going viral in China. The last time something went viral in China, the whole world had to shut down. This time, it's not so bad, not yet. Tim Cook has gone viral for a speech, one where he said Apple and China had a symbiotic relationship. He said Apple's growth was tied to China's growth. Now, that's quite a statement, given the US-China trade war and the larger sentiment really around business in China. But the Apple top boss said it, and the Chinese media was quick to pounce on it. The timing was even more interesting because of the case of TikTok. Just a few days back, the TikTok CEO was grilled in the US. Western governments are banning TikTok amid security concerns. The US has given it an ultimatum: face a ban in America or leave the Chinese parent company ByteDance. Basically, TikTok, a Chinese company, has its back to the wall in the US, while Apple, an American company, is being celebrated in China. That is the difference that the Chinese media is trying to highlight. Leading from the front was Beijing's mouthpiece, the Global Times. It quoted someone as saying that China is the one that is actually practicing fair and free trade. But it's not as simple as that. Let's look at the facts to understand the full story. Tim Cook was in Beijing to attend the China Development Forum. It's a government-organized event. And what was he going to do except perhaps praise China? Remember, China is a big market for Apple and Apple products as well. Apple earned almost $24 billion in revenue from China in just the last quarter of 2022. So perhaps Tim Cook's words should be taken with more than a pinch of salt, because the ground reality seems a bit different than his speech suggests. You see, Apple is diversifying its manufacturing base. It is looking at countries like India and Vietnam as alternative manufacturing hubs. Apple product manufacturers have agreed to set up multiple factories in India. Taiwanese Apple suppliers like Foxconn, Pegatron and Wistron are all expanding their footprint in India. This is in accordance with Apple's risk reduction plan. And why is Apple diversifying? One reason is its experiences with COVID in China. Remember, Beijing adopted a strict zero-COVID policy to combat the virus. It was forced to repeal the policy last December after mass protests. But zero COVID greatly damaged the business sentiment while in force. China had imposed draconian measures to try and stop the virus from spreading. It disrupted supply chains across industries. Apple felt the pinch too. You may remember the chaotic scenes at the iPhone plant in Zhengzhou last November. It's the world's largest iPhone manufacturing facility run by Foxconn. Workers there protested, and they were protesting against the brutal lockdown conditions. Some even tried to flee the factory by jumping over fences. The events shook global belief in China. Then, of course, there's the rising US-China tensions. They're fighting over a lot of points, really. TikTok, computer chips, tariffs, and of course, Taiwan. The Taiwan issue may eventually spiral into a full-blown US-China war. So both the zero COVID policy debacle and the rising US-China tensions seem to have woken up Apple. It's trying to relocate some of the manufacturing, but it can't be done overnight. Even last year, more than 90% of Apple products were made in China. The years of investment in China cannot be undone in an instant. Apple will still have to depend on Chinese manufacturing for some time. So you can expect Tim Cook to keep going to Beijing, keep spouting praise at a Chinese government event. After all, Apple is a business, and China is both a manufacturing base and an important market. So Tim Cook is going to do whatever he has to do to keep his business running smoothly. But as far as China's narrative is concerned, keeping an eye on the ground reality might be a better idea than listening to Cook's speeches in Beijing. And here's the latest from Israel. The country is boiling. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets, waving Israeli flags, blocking roads and setting fires. It has made President Isaac Herzog speak up. He has urged the government to halt its judicial overhaul. And I'm quoting from what the President of Israel said. For the sake of the unity of the people of Israel, for the sake of responsibility, I call on you to stop the legislative process immediately. This is a win for the people of Israel, albeit a small one, because his function is largely ceremonial, the president's function, but his words show the alarming divisions in Israel at the moment. He said this after the civil unrest broke out last night, intensifying one of the gravest crises in Israeli history. And this fire was fueled by one sentence, a sentence that came from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He fired Israel's defense minister in a one-line statement. And here's why.
Now I declare loudly and publicly, for the sake of Israel's security, for the sake of our sons and daughters, the legislative process should be stopped.
This was the Israeli defense minister. He criticized the government's divisive judicial reform. He said it is causing turmoil in the country's military and posing a threat to the country's security. So he urged the government to halt it. He suggested that they sit down and talk with the opposition. But you already know how this ends. He said all this in a speech on Saturday night. By Sunday, he was ousted. Prime Minister Netanyahu did not even give a full explanation. Later on social media, he said, and I'm quoting, "We must all stand up strongly against refusals." Instead, there were others who began standing up to Netanyahu. Chaos unleashed. Demonstrations began late at night in and around Tel Aviv.
But this is not democracy. This is a new form of regime, what they call a procedural democracy or a hollow democracy.
The atmosphere is incredible, historic. I don't remember ever witnessing so many emotions. So many people keep coming week after week to protest at night in the rain, and it feels we have reached an incredible climax, and we hope we will succeed.
נראה לי שהבנו כולנו ממש היום שהדיקטטורה החלה, ואני ישבתי על הספה בבית כבר עם פיג'מה והרגשתי שאני חייבת לבוא, כי הפיטורים של גלנט הם ממש היו צעד מאוד מאוד חריף שאני חושבת שלא חשבנו שכבר נגיע אליו בשלב הזה, וזה ממש מפחיד.
And now Israel has been brought to a standstill. It is facing a historic general strike. Highways have been blocked. Crowds broke through police barriers outside the Prime Minister's residence.
We went to the Prime Minister's residence, and afterwards we got dispersed by the water spray. I got sprayed into my face directly, and then we just went here, like all of us. It was never as big as it was today.
Over 24 mayors have gone on a hunger strike. Flights were halted. Many malls, restaurants and universities are closed. Israel's Consul General in New York has resigned, and the country's largest workers' union has joined the strikes.
The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is fired, dismissed like this. What are we, a banana republic?
But this is not surprising. The crisis that began weeks ago is only deepening, set off by the government's attempt to give itself greater control over the selection of Supreme Court judges, limiting the court's authority over parliament. Some are in favor of this. They say it will make the court more representative. It will show the diversity of Israeli society, but critics say it will give the government too much power over judiciary. It will remove the few checks and balances that exist. And for weeks, this has invited massive protests, tensions with the Biden government in the US, and unrest in the military. Now there's a rift in the governing coalition, because this decision only goes to show that Netanyahu remains defiant, and his recent move is a clear signal. It shows that he intends to proceed with a final vote in the parliament this week. But if Netanyahu thought that this decision will help him, he may have been wrong. It seems like his decision has backfired, for Israel has not seen protests that matched the intensity of this one. The protests were so fierce, lawmakers started coming forward with doubts. Opposition also jumped on the chance.
I call on Israel's government, the Likud, to come to their senses, to stop the legislation and come talk to us. We don't have to crash. We don't have to fall apart. There are solutions.
Lapid called the sacking of the defense minister a new low for Israel, echoing the emotions of many. There is no precedent in Israel's history for a security minister to get fired because he warned of a security danger, something required by his position. So why would Prime Minister Netanyahu choose to force such a drastic move? Critics say he could not have expected such massive backlash. Others say he's getting angsty over his ongoing corruption trial. So he wants to push through the changes. And this comes at a time of growing Palestinian insurgency in West Bank. Tensions with Hezbollah, threat of Lebanese militia, and growing tensions over control of the Gaza Strip. But Netanyahu seems undeterred. He has given no indication that he's going to back down, and this could go either way. But one thing is clear, no matter the decision, it would be the most significant of shake-ups in Israel's political history.